Muchas gracias a todos. Realmente es un honor tener hoy al doctor Michael Nelson. El doctor Michael Nelson pues tiene 35 años ayudando a otras personas. Él es uno de los pioneros en el área de medicina funcional. Empezó su carrera en los años 90 y pues siempre con esta visión integral del tratamiento de las personas. Y en este momento, pues el doctor Nelson se ha dedicado y se dedica a la elaboración de productos nutricionales para mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas. Y en este momento, pues él trabaja con dos nutracéuticos, con dos empresas que son Life Enhancement Products en Brain Being. Y pues él tiene un logo que realmente es muy bonito, que es como el ánimo, la mente y la memoria, mood, mind, and memory. So I want to introduce everybody to Dr. Michael Nelson. He has dedicated his 35 years career to helping others improve their life. He began practicing functional medicine in the early 1990s with a focus on the treatment of the entire person. Now, Dr. Nelson applies his expertise at the help of two nutraceutical brands, Life Enhancement Products and Brain Being. And he used these words, mood, mind, memory, and because he personally formulated each and every product in Brain Being lines that we use and we love it. Okay, so thank you, Michael, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Madrigal. It's a real pleasure to be here and speak with your group. And I look forward to sharing lots more information in the future with your group. Today's focus is going to be on the eye-brain connection, in particular omega-3 fatty acids and lutein, and why you guys should be caring about this critical ingredient mix and how you can use it in your patients, and also what the science is saying in relationship to omega-3 fatty acids and lutein. Let's see. So my career actually began back in the 1980s, early 1980s. My undergraduate degree is in respiratory therapy, and I worked 9 years before I went off to get my doctorate degree in the neonatal intensive care nursery. So that really afforded me the opportunity to see the miracle of modern medicine, and at the same time see the shortcomings of modern medicine, because we really overstepped the boundaries of viability in the nursery when I was working there. And I think that's still the case today, where we could save the lives of these young children, but they weren't really quality lives at that point, because so many of the children ended up having neurological issues was the major problem. So modern medicine started to lose its luster for me, because I thought I was going to go off to med school. That's where I was headed. And when I saw that really we could save a lot of lives, but the lives that we were saving should have been saved earlier in the prevention of the disease process to begin with. So that kind of brought to mind this concept of disconnected systems, where we were looking at the person in a individualized, siloed way that was disconnected from the whole person. And that brought me into the realm of functional medicine. And functional medicine, anybody that's ever looked at functional medicine from a conceptual standpoint, I think we'll quickly see that it makes a tremendous amount of sense, because this truly is the way in which we should be interfacing with the patient populations that we're interfacing with. We should take into consideration all the different realms that go into making them who they are and what they are and how they manifest health or disease. And so it's the functional medicine model that I've used for the last 35 years to help people really achieve optimal wellness, health. And it's still the way I view the world in which I live in. I believe that functional medicine is the future for medicine for all people around the globe. So I love this quote. This is William Shakespeare. He's a famous playwright and a famous author. And he says, "The eyes are the window to the soul." And truly, that is going to make more sense to all of us once we learn a little bit more about why that might be the case. But before we do that, I'd like to just refresh our memories in the fact that the brain represents only 2% of the total body mass. So it represents 2% of the total weight of the body, but it consumes 20 to 30% of all the energy at rest. That's at rest. So what happens when you start to think is you consume a lot more energy with that 2% of the body mass. And the reason it's so important is because it controls literally all the functions of the body. So this small little 2% weighted organ that sits in between our ears is critically important to maintain the integrity of over our lifetime, so that our physiology and our mood, mind, and memory can also be maintained over that course as well. And today we're in the midst of a massive change as it relates to some of the things that are taking place in our brains. And we're seeing that show up with the incidence in autism rates that are skyrocketing. Back in the 90s, mid 90s, it was a really rare condition. You really didn't hear that much about autism. You knew the term when I was going through my training, but I never really thought that I would ever really see that patient population manifest in my practice. And yet today we know that 1 in 59 folks that are born, 1 in 59 babies that are born today in the United States are autistic or on the spectrum for ASD. And there's also an emerging epidemic of Alzheimer's and dementia taking place. And I really want you to focus on this graph. This is a very important graph for us to take note of. This is a study that was done by a major insurance company in the United States called Blue Cross Blue Shield. They're a major insurance company here, and they insure millions of lives in the United States. And they went back in their records and they looked at the rate of diagnoses of Alzheimer's and dementia in various age groups, because they were noticing that there was a pretty significant increase. And so when they came away from that research, they found that over the years 2013 and 2017, there was a 373% increase in the rate of Alzheimer's in the age group. Look at this, the age group 30 to 44. And there was also an increase of 311% in the age group 45 to 54 and 143% in the age group 55 to 64. Now, this is alarming. This should be alarming to everybody on the call today, because this is showing us that Alzheimer's is now moving from an age-related disease to a middle-aged disease. And there's many reasons why this is taking place. The World Health Organization recognizes that depression, right now, depression across the world is the #1 cause of disability. And we also know that about 1/5 of those people that are having depression will eventually go on to be diagnosed with dementia. So I want you to think about this. You have lots of patients that are coming in with mood disorders. And one of the things I would love you to start to be thinking about is this an early sign of Alzheimer's disease? Now in 2020, this is it from the journal Translational Psychiatry, this is just a year ago, they're advocating now that we start to reconceptualize the concept of depression and look at it through the lens of an early risk factor or early risk sign for developing Alzheimer's. And they say, we advocate moving depression and depression symptoms into the focus of prevention of cognitive decline and dementia. And in this paper, they clearly state that this is an early marker for the possibility of developing dementia at a higher rate than normal. And we also know that there's a relationship between our diet and depression as well. In fact, we know that DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, a major fatty acid that's found in the brain of everybody, and it is the #1 omega-3 fatty acid found in the brain. EPA is hardly found at all in the brain of humans. We know that there's a relationship between fish consumption and depression. If you look over here on the vertical axis, you can see the rate of depression. And then you look on the horizontal axis, you can see the amount of fish that's consumed in the diets of various countries. And you can see that there's a direct relationship between how much fish somebody's consuming and how much depression someone's getting. Very interesting. And in this article from Lipids, they show very clearly that there's a relationship between your erythrocyte fatty acid concentration of DHA and depression. You know, this last year has been probably the most trying year in the history of the world with the COVID epidemic, and it's created a tremendous amount of social isolation amongst all walks of life. We've separated ourselves because we've had to because of the pandemic, and we've been told that we need to stay far away, and the people that are suffering the most are the young and the old. And what they know is that social isolation is just as harmful as smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. So we need to be thinking about some of these impacts that are taking place along the lines of the pandemic and how that can impact the neurological system in a very powerful way. This is a study that just came out. This is 2021, and what they found is, this is just brand new, and it was just startling to me when I saw this, that there was a 90% increase rate in depression among college students that were going through the pandemic. And I just want to read this to you. Over the course of the pandemic from March to July 2020, the proportions of participants at risk for clinical depression ranged from 46 to 61%. This is up 90% increase in depression rates compared to the same population just prior to the pandemic. Again, illustrating the fact that this social isolation and this concept of putting yourself at a distance from your social, your crowd, your tribe, can have a dramatic impact. And they also found that the restoration of these exercise habits did not improve their actual mental well-being. In other words, there's a long latency process that's taking place amongst these people. So just going back into physical activity is not helping them cure or get their moods to improve, which is also very alarming. Now, when I was going through school, we learned that there's a neurotransmitter, and there's a presynaptic neurotransmitter and a postsynaptic neurotransmitter, and in between there is this neurosynaptic cleft. And in between all that are these molecules: serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, glutamate, and all these different molecules that will signal the postsynaptic receptor to basically turn on and react in such a way that will give you a desired result, an improvement in mood or not an improvement in mood. And this was a very simplistic model that was kind of pushed along based on a lot of kind of, semi-good research. And really, now that we've looked back retrospectively at the research seems to be less likely to have passed the scrutiny of modern science today, and yet it's still the modern paradigm. And so you can see in between these greenish neurons, that's the presynaptic neuron, and then this is the postsynaptic neuron. And then you can see it's surrounded by something too. And this surrounding is the astrocyte. And this astrocyte forms a cradle. They call it the astrocytic cradle. So now we know that there's 3 components. There's not just 2 components, a presynaptic and a postsynaptic neuron. There's a tripartite component to it called the astrocyte. And the astrocyte is essential for proper neurotransmission. And then if you look up here on the far regions of this diagram, you'll see this area called the microglia. And the microglia are involved in it. And now they're calling it the tetrapartite synapse. And so there's all these players that participate in the way in which we look, act, and feel with our moods. And Andrew Miller from Emory University has really done the seminal work on this. And what he's found is as all these components start to become dysregulated or involved in the process, which they always are, they start to change the context and the relationship with these neurotransmitters in the brain. Now, I also want to remind you that the brain is really a compilation of neurons and immune cells. In fact, 80% of the brain mass is composed of immune cells, not neurons. So only a small composition of the brain is made of neurons, very small. The majority is made of the astrocytes, the glia, the microglia, the oligodendrocytes, and all these other components that make up the actual brain mass. And those neurons, those immune cells that are within that brain mass, they react to signals, just like your immune system would. And so they'll react to what we call PAMPs, pathogen-associated molecular patterns that might be coming from an infection, a systemic infection, or they could be coming from a leaky gut. We know that the most prolific stimulator of the immune system by far, they use it in all the research studies, is a component of cell wall debris called the lipopolysaccharide, LPS. And they use this in most of the studies to elicit a massive immune response so that they can see how that influences the cells that they're either working on or the animals that they're working on. And they know there's no better way to stimulate the immune system to a reactive state than with the LPS molecule. We also know that when cells break down from stress or poor diet or just poor lifestyle factors, they start to send signals called DAMPs. These are called danger-associated molecular patterns. And these DAMPs also cause the immune system to become hypervigilant or highly active. Now, these both, whether it's a pathogen or it's the fact that you're stressed out, they all start to come through this central signaling process that we know as cytokines. And we've heard a lot about cytokine storms recently because of the fact that COVID, for some individuals, can induce a very significant cytokine storm. That's from a pathogen, but it can also be induced through the stress response too. So imagine if you get infected and you're stressed out. It's symbiotic. It actually elevates the cytokine reactions in many people. And some people are prone to a higher level of cytokine reactivity just based on their genetics. So we should keep this type of concept in mind when we're working with our patients, that we've got PAMPs and DAMPs that could influence the immune system and ultimately influence the immune system in the brain. Now, the brain has these very unique components called microglia, and the microglia are actually resident macrophages. And we know about macrophages because those are macro, big eaters, phage, eat. And these big eaters are resident macrophages in the brain, and they're called microglia. And we found out recently, this isn't that long ago, this is 2013, that they're influenced significantly by the fatty acid concentration that we ingest. And they impact the way in which they protect our brain. the macrophages actually eat the beta amyloid, and they start to clean up the mess that takes place with the beta amyloid deposition in the tau protein phosphorylation. These are all markers of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. So this study was the first study to investigate whether or not DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, or eicosapentaenoic acid, both omega-3s found in omega-3 fatty acids, could influence the engulfing of the beta amyloid in humans. And lo and behold, they absolutely found it. I'll just read the last sentence. The present results support the idea that omega-3 fatty acids and the pathways with which they are associated are promising treatments targeting for Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative disorders. Now think back about that slide I just showed you with the Blue Cross Blue Shield and the rate of Alzheimer's and dementia increase with the young individuals. There's nobody in your practice that does not need to have adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids now based on just this one research study. And by the way, this is from the Karolinska Institute from Stockholm, Sweden. You guys probably know about the Karolinska Institute from some of the Nobel Prize, right? It's a very prestigious institute. They don't just publish stuff, and you know it's really very difficult to get stuff through the publishing regime there at the Karolinska. So one of the things that I think people don't recognize with omega-3 fatty acids, and in particular DHA, is that they're actually antioxidants. Now, I didn't know that a few years ago, and now I'm starting to know a lot more about them, but they're actually antioxidants, kind of like vitamin C might be, or resveratrol. And I never really thought of them like that when I first started working with fatty acids. I always thought of them as being more part of the cell membrane and creating fluidity and helping to maintain the kind of the arachidonic acid, EPA, the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid concentrations. But here's what they found in this study. It's remarkable. On this control side over here, where you see all the green dots, that's markers of actual oxidation in the retina. This is retinal epithelial cells. These are they're the most highly oxidizing cells in the human body. They are highly reactive to oxygen species. So you can see a lot of the green phosphorescence there. Now, they're also highly dependent upon, for their function, on DHA. And DHA, in particular, DHA in the triglyceride form, there's different forms of DHA. Triglyceride is the natural form that you would find in fish, not in some of the fish oils that have a ethyl ester DHA. And you're going to find out that I have a fish oil supplement that uses the triglyceride form of DHA. But you can see that this control side looks really green. And then you look over here on the DHA TG side, and there's hardly any more green. And that's because the DHA has quenched the free radical activity in the retina. Now that's remarkable, in my opinion. That's just incredible. So we should appreciate the fact that the fatty acids participate in the microglial activity, and they help to basically dissolve or get rid of a lot of the debris that takes place in the brain of Alzheimer's and dementia patients. And this is a quick video that I want to show you. And what you're seeing in green here is the microglia cells. Now, this is real time. I want you to know that this is real time reactions in a real live mouse. Just like a human, this would happen just in a human's brain too. And what they're showing is an injury that's going to take place. They do a very precise injury, and watch how the microglia react to this injury.
And look what they do. Crazy, right? I mean, if you don't remember anything else from today's talk, remember that. I mean, it's really amazing, right?
Now that is incredible. So that is actually happening in your brain all the time. And it's there to actually serve a purpose, and that's to clean up any excess debris, and it also helps to clean up dead cells. It helps to remove any of the things that are getting in the way of the actual neurotransmission and make sure that your brain is actually functioning correctly.
And look what.
So we know that there's a high degree of risk for people that have low fatty acid concentrations in their brain and the risk of dementia. Now, this study up here on my left-hand side that says plasma phosphatidylcholine docosahexaenoic acid content and the risk of dementia, this is from Ernie Schaefer. Now, Ernie Schaefer was one of the primary authors on what's called the Framingham study, a very famous study that a lot of us know about. And the Framingham study is the longest ongoing trial for heart disease and other disease risk factors. And what they found was the folks that had the highest level of DHA had a 47% reduction in the risk of developing all-cause dementia, not just Alzheimer's, all-cause dementia. So again, there's nobody in our practice or anybody in our family, within our family's cohort, that should not be taking these incredibly important substances to prevent many of these disease processes that we're seeing. We also know that the fatty acids incorporate into the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the energy powerhouses of the cell, and they control so much of the activity of our life based on how much energy we have and how much free radicals we produce from making that energy. And it's really important to understand that they're incorporated into the cardiolipin of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria control energy within the body, and they have to have a membrane. And that membrane is composed of fats. And the fats that are in that membrane have to have the right, you need to have the right type of fat. And the most important type of fat to have in that mitochondria is an omega-3 fatty acid. So what they found in this study was the present study investigated the impact of fish oil supplementation. This is on humans now. They did muscle biopsies, and they found that our novel findings demonstrate omega-3s are robustly incorporated into mitochondrial membranes following supplementation. Again, nobody in our practices should be without having adequate levels of fatty acids. Now, DHA is the one that I like to focus on because it's the primary fatty acid that's in the brain. And it's associated with all sorts of various impacts on brain health. We know that people that have higher levels of fatty acids in the red blood cell membrane, this is called the omega-3 index, have higher hippocampal volumes. The hippocampus is the area in the brain that's associated with your memory. And we also know that as your hippocampus shrinks, we know that your risk for dementia increases. So there's this inverse relationship. Higher DHA, there's a very detailed relationship. DHA definitely improves your hippocampal volumes. So we know that for all sorts of different, from all sorts of different research studies. DHA also downregulates the most neurotoxic neurotransmitter that we can produce right now. It's called glutamate. And so it starts to re-regulate the way in which we receive that message so that glutamate will not shrink the hippocampus. So here's a study that they did. This is just in, 2017, the Journal of Alzheimer's, and this is a double-blind placebo control trial, and it's a 12-month trial, and most of the studies need to be done for 12 months or longer in order to see any impact. And I'll show you some dose and time study results that we should all be thinking about in relationship to how we actually dose our patients so that they can essentially have the results that we're looking for. But what they did in this study is they looked at whether or not DHA would actually improve the hippocampal volume, and then also whether or not it would improve their cognition, their ability to function. We know as cognition starts to decline, the level of functionality in their home, their ability to take care of themselves, go to the grocery store, drive, turn the stove off and remember to turn the stove off. All those things start to become subject to some ambiguity if they don't have the proper cognition. So these findings suggest that DHA supplementations 2 grams per day for 12 months in mild cognitively impaired subjects can significantly improve cognitive function and slow the progression of hippocampal atrophy. Larger long-term confirmatory studies are warranted. So this is just a call to action saying, hey, there's enough evidence now that there's nobody that should not be having at least 2 grams per day of the DHA. That's how we should be thinking about this. This seems to be about the right level for proper impact on the brain. But we should also recognize that there's alterations in certain genotypes. In fact, the ApoE4 genotype, we all probably know about ApoE4, it has the most associated risk for developing dementia and Alzheimer's than any other gene. I'm an ApoE4 heterozygous carrier. I pay attention to this research on a regular basis. I'm constantly looking at ApoE4 and how that can impact mood, mind, and memory. Well, it turns out that ApoE4 is a very inflammatory genotype. That's why it's associated with cardiovascular risk and dementia risk. Those two go hand in hand. But it also is associated with lower absorptions of DHA. And I will tell you that I've been taking 4 times the amount that most people should take of DHA just to get my levels to be at the level that I would like them to be, which is above 10 on my omega-3 index. And it's because DHA levels for people that have ApoE4, they do not get absorbed as readily. So we need to give them more. So this is what they concluded. Interventions aiming to increase DHA status to protect against cognitive decline must consider ApoE4 carrier status and focus on higher doses of supplementary DHA to ensure adequate brain delivery. So if you're doing any of the genotype testing and you come across an ApoE4 heterozygous or homozygous, you need to consider increasing their dose by 3 to 5 times the level that you normally would, and aiming towards the higher level on the omega-3 index, so 10 or higher. And this is the study that just recently came out. This is a 2020 study, and this is where they came up with the dosage. We defined high dose supplementation as greater than 2 grams of triglyceride-based DHA consumptions per day, not ethyl ester. They specifically call out triglyceride because triglyceride forms of fatty acids are better absorbed. The ethyl esters are just a way for them to stabilize the fatty acid and put it into a capsule and then sell it to you. But your body has to convert it into triglyceride, and your body doesn't do a very good job at that. You can get really high quality triglyceride forms of omega-3 fatty acids, such as in Brain Omega, that you can use that will accomplish the same goal. We acknowledge this definition is limited as our study has only tested 1 dose of DHA dose, but they got the results that they were looking for. Now let's go down to the bottom here. How long should you consider maintaining that dose? Well, it turns out that it should be a minimum of 2.5 years. That's how long it takes for your brain to start to incorporate this. So 2.5 years, you should be having that level, and it really should be a lifetime. But don't look for quick reactions. Your brain omega level or your omega-3 index level will increase within 6 weeks. It's the red blood cell that you're looking at. But the brain takes 2.5 years to actually increase its level. So if you've got somebody that's starting at a very low level and you get them to 10 on their omega-3 index, you tell them that they need to have this level consistently elevated at that level for the remainder of their life in order for them to have a healthy brain and a minimum of 2.5 years. So let's look at the eye in relationship to the brain. I mentioned that quote from Shakespeare, and the eye really should be viewed as an approachable part of the brain, like John Dowling says in his textbook, The Retina. Now, John Dowling's a very famous neuro-ophthalmologist, and he's from Harvard, and most people just call it the retina. But look at what he says in the bottom part of this. He says, retina, an approachable part of the brain. Now, everybody on this call that's a physician like myself has looked into the eyes of their patient population with an ophthalmoscopes to determine whether or not they've got any abnormalities in their retina. And I used to always look at that, and I used to say, that is such a miracle that I can see the actual nervous system with my naked eye. It's the only nerve that you can see with your own eye. And it's a beautiful thing. And I would look at the blood vessels, and I would look to see if there was any silver wire deformities, or there were any drusen that were starting to show up, or did I see any potential aspects of cardiovascular disease, such as perhaps a infarct or something like that I could translate into maybe a cardiovascular risk. And then I would also look at this very important structure called the macula. And the macula is this little freckle that's in our eye that's got a highly concentrated pigment that's only formed from carotenoids, things that we ingest. And these carotenoids concentrate in the macula because they protect us from blue light. Now, primates and humans are the only species that have what we call a fovea. And it's that small indentation that I put a picture of here. And it's this little tiny little cup, that sits in the retina. And that's the macula, the foveal pit, they call it. And that's where all this lutein and zeaxanthine and mesozeaxanthine just coalesces and forms. It's formed there at anywhere from 500 to 1,000% higher than any other tissue. And what we're going to see that same level of concentration also occurs in the brain tissue as well. So when you look in the eyes of your patients, I really want you to think that you're also looking into the brain of your patients, and you're determining what's happening in the brain, because the retina is an approachable part of the brain. We know that macular lutein, zeaxanthine are related to brain lutein and zeaxanthine in primates. And I told you that primates and humans are the only ones that have that fovea. There's a big relationship between the primate and the human information, as we're going to see. So this is a graph that shows the intake of our carotenoids. There's over 300 different carotenoids that are found in our diet. These are the primary ones that we typically eat. And on the left-hand side, on the blue or the yellow, the solid yellow here, that's what we get in our diet, right? We get about that much in our diet. You can see that we get a lot of beta carotene in our diet. We get a lot of lycopene because we eat carrots and tomatoes, but we don't get a lot of zeaxanthin, and we don't get a lot of lutein. But when we look at the level that we find in matched brain tissue, there's an exorbitant amount of lutein compared to the level that we ingest. So we get a tremendous amount of this selective uptake into the brain tissue of our body, over 500% more than any other carotenoid. So we know that there's this relationship between our macula and the lutein levels and cognition. And what they did in this study, this is the Georgia centenarian study. It's one of my favorite studies. I haven't seen a study like this since they've done this one, and they still are working on this study. But this is out of University of Boston, Tufts, and Philadelphia. A bunch of other researchers participated in this. And what they did is they got volunteers that were in their later years of life. They were in their 8th, 9th, 10th decade of life. and they asked them to submit to studies on their eye, look at their macular pigment. They also asked them to do cognitive assessments periodically throughout the remaining years of their life. And then they also got them to volunteer their brains after they died for analysis, and they would look at the brain tissue. And what they found was there was a significant correlation between lutein concentrations in the cortex, in the brain tissue, and their mini mental scores, and their the CRAD battery test, which is a language test, and another one's for cognition. And they were astonished by this. They actually could not, they were really, really, really surprised at all this, because they knew that that possibly the eye might be impacting some of the cognition, but they had no idea that the higher their lutein concentrations were, the better their cognitions were. And this is the brain levels of lutein. You can see that we saw the beta carotene was in our diet. It's only half as concentrated in brain tissue as lutein. This is significant. So we know that brain tissue and macular tissue match up very clearly with this cognition score that we're seeing in people that are 100 years old. So we also, this was just recently repeated, just I think it was 2020. This study came to the same conclusion that macular pigment optical density, MPOD, and plasma lutein and zeaxanthine concentrations were both significantly associated with higher cognitive performances among French elderly community dwellers. Again, showing us that the brain and the eye are intimately connected. So when you look into the eyes of your patients and you look for that macular pigment, you'll have to do some special testing to determine the actual macular pigment optical density, but you'll also be able to question them on their eyesight. And if they're starting to have problems and they've got a low omega-3 fatty acid concentration, you need to start to intervene rapidly and aggressively. They also looked at young people, and young people also had the same result. They found, and here, this is from the they were going to use these cohorts as a way to have a control. And a control is somebody that's not going to respond to the actual intervention. So they picked college students. But what they found was that the college students responded equally as good to supplementation with lutein and zeaxanthine as did the centenarians. Now listen to this, what they say here. At baseline, macular pigment optical density in the study was higher than previously published averages for healthy adults, indicating that the sample was relatively well nourished. In other words, the people that were submitting to this study, the kids, these were young kids, 20 to 30 years old, they already had higher levels of macular pigment optical density than age-matched controls, meaning that there shouldn't be any real impact that they should see because they're already above average. However, following 1 year of supplementations, those on the active supplement increased significantly between baseline and 12 months. The participants on the placebo did not increase significantly. Now, these guys also increased their ability to have complex attention and then also have a better spatial memory. So these are the graphs that they're showing. When their macular pigment increased with the supplementation, they were able to have better complex thinking, which is highly critical for a young college student. They need to have complex, if they're studying mathematics or they're studying engineering or they're studying chemistry or they're doing any of the computer sciences, there's a lot of complexity with all of that. And they need to be able to have that neuroplastic capacity. And what they're showing is they actually did. They were having significantly, look at the difference here. There didn't have any change with the people that were in the control group that didn't get the supplement, but the people that did had a significant increase. But I need to let you know that getting into the Georgia college system is as hard as it is to get into Princeton or Harvard, because in Georgia, they give free tuition to all college students that maintain a B average in high school. So these kids were already at the top of their class, and they got better. So when you have children, or you've got some of your patients with children that are looking to get a competitive edge in their brain, and that we all need that today, all the kids do, then you should definitely be looking at improving their macular pigment optical density and their DHA concentrations. Another thing that lutein has been shown to do is increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So this was remarkable to me. They found that when you looked at placebo over here, there was no change over the time course, 6 months. And then when you looked at the supplement group that got the, and this is the exact lutein that we use in our Brain Omega product. This is the exact same material that we use in that product. That their actual brain-derived neurotrophic factor increased significantly. Look at you're over here at the, what is that, like 1475, and now you're up to like 200 point increase. So that's a pretty significant increase. Now, brain-derived neurotrophic factor is miracle grow for your neurons. And we know that stress inhibits it. We know that age inhibits it. We know that lack of sleep inhibits it. We know that, all these different lifestyle factors can blunt the actual production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that can change the way your brain actually works and starts to create neuritic connections. So having an advantage with brain-derived neurotrophic factors is like having a massive advantage for a youthful neuroplastic brain. So we also know that sleep is a big influencer of our mood, mind, and memory. And we know lack of sleep creates a whole bunch of problems with our neurological system. It's when those microglia go in and clean up all the debris when we're in deep sleep. And we know that exposure to screen time, this concept of blue light from all the different screens that we're participating with, whether it's our smartphone or our computer screen, or the lights that we have in our house now are all filled with blue light, that can impact our actual sleep cycle. And what they found when they used the same process, they used the lutein and zeaxanthin that we use, they found that it actually improved significantly their sleep scores. So it's something to consider as well. And it improved a bunch of other things too. Headaches improved, neck strain improved, eye strain improved, eye fatigue improved, and sleep complaints improved. So we know that the blue light can dysregulate what we call the circadian biology in our body. And when that circadian biology gets disrupted, it'll interrupt our sleep cycle. So another good reason to improve your lutein consumption. Now, there's this, when I first started developing Brain Omega, I had done a tremendous amount of research, and this is the one research study that really caught my attention. This is many, many years ago. And what I found, what this research study described was, it's the combination of DHA and lutein that needs to be considered when you're using something to improve cognition and brain health. And what they did is they gave these women, these were elderly women, lutein and DHA at almost the identical concentrations that we have with the Brain Omega product. And what they found is they had better verbal fluency, and they were able to have a better memory and learning. They could have better capacity to learn, or what they call learning efficiency. And so because both DHA and lutein accumulate in the brain, these effects may have occurred through increased concentrations in the brain or influences on metabolic processes that modulate brain function. And indeed, that's truly what's being discovered now, is it's the combination of these two fat-soluble substances in neurological tissue that seems to be extremely important for neurological health and cognition. So this is the product that I developed. This is a product called Brain Omega. We use, they're very small capsules. They're about the size of a raisin. So I designed them specifically to be small so that children could take them, because I know that children need a lot of they need a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, and they typically don't get them, and they don't like to swallow pills. And also adults don't like to swallow big, large pills. So I needed to make it very concentrated, and I needed to make it very easy to consume as well. So in 2 capsules, you get 460 milligrams of triglyceride DHA and 90 milligrams of EPA. You get what we call the Lutamax 2020. This is a patented form of lutein. And each serving contains 20 milligrams of lutein and 4 milligrams of zeaxanthin. And this comes from what is a International Fish Oil Associated Standard certified omega-3 fatty acid. So this is farmed in a sustainable way, and they're never over-farmed. We only use small anchovies, mackerel, herring. And when I get my fish oil in, it tells me exactly the longitude and latitude and the area in which it was fished and caught and the time in which it was caught. And it's all purified. It's molecularly distilled to get rid of all the metals. And so it's a really pure form of omega-3 fatty acids. I know that Dr. Madrigal uses quite a bit of it in her practice, but it's a really great way for you to achieve what we've just talked about with the lutein and DHA concentrations in your patient population. I think it's also important to recognize that B vitamins are extremely important for the absorption and utilization of the omega-3s. So this was a study that I just put in the reference, but B vitamins are necessary for the incorporation of DHA into circulating phospholipids. Emerging evidence suggests that B vitamins influences DHA supplementation's efficacy on cognition, which is absolutely true. We know that B vitamins are essential for cognition, but they're also essential for fatty acid absorption. So this is our B balance that we always recommend to utilize with the omega-3s. It's got all your Bs in it. It's I developed this based on methylation patterns. I think you probably all have patients that are MTHFR polymorphic and have elevated homocysteine and are looking for ways to improve methylation status, whether it's trying to prevent cancer or just trying to improve their overall health and memory. This is a great way to do it. We use all the methylated forms of the B complexes. I use the methyl tetrahydrofolate form of folate, methylcobalamin. I use benfotiamine, which is another very important synthetic form of B1 that's been shown in many clinical trials to be very beneficial for neuropathy, as I think it's well known for, but other nerve conditions out there. So if you're going to use the fatty acids, I also suggest that you use some form of a B complex in addition to that for better absorption and utilization. So I spoke a lot. Hopefully you guys got something out of this and are able to take this information and use it in your clinical practice. And I'm happy to open up to answer any questions you may have. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Madrigal, for allowing me the opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Michael. It's really wonderful to see this connection between brain and eyes. No, it's what you say, that when you see your patient eye, you are going to see like the brain. No, it's really amazing. So there is a question about how long do we need to supplement with DHA 2 grams per day?
So I shared with you one of the studies that showed that you can change the omega-3 index within 6 weeks, but the brain will take 2.5 years. So it's really important to get that number elevated and then hold that number in an elevated state for years, if not decades or lifetime.
And is there a contraindication to continue, for example, for 1.5 years with DHA?
No, there's no contraindication. It's an essential fat that has to be in our diets. So there's no contraindication whatsoever.
Okay. And can you explain how can we know when omega-3 supplement is good quality? Because there are many supplements with omega-3 in the market, but sometimes they're very cheap, and maybe the people think that they are the best, but they're not. So can you explain how to choose and decide which is the best?
Yeah, so that's another really great question. You get what you pay for. So when you buy a cheap oil, you're getting the cheapest oil, and that cheapest oil usually has contaminants in it, and it usually has peroxidation in it. So those are two things you don't want in an oil. You don't want to have an oil that's rancid, and you don't want to have an oil that's contaminated. So the way to determine that is, one, the cost can really lead you in that direction if you don't have the total understanding. If you buy a higher quality oil, it's going to cost more. But the ones that typically have the IFOS certification, like we do, IFOS is, you can't get that certification unless you've gone through a number of different tests and performed those tests to get that agency to say this is an IFOS oil. And those tests include lipid peroxidation, heavy metal contamination, sustainable fishing practices, proper, what they'll do is they'll stabilize the oil with an antioxidant of some sort. When you get our fish oil, you'll notice that it's got a colored capsule around it. It's a natural color we put on it that keeps light from damaging the oil.
Yes.
That's why we do that. So it's got a small little natural coating around it that keeps any light from causing it to become oxidized. So we also use a nitrogen flush. So nitrogen is an inert gas that's not oxygen. And then when we make the capsules, we have a nitrogen flush that hits that capsule and pushes out all the oxygen so that it doesn't become rancid over time.
Yes. And what about children with ADHD? Can you use that for example, small children with 5 years old, 4 years old?
Yes. So absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we made the capsule so small, is children we've even had them break them open and chew them, and that's fine. They don't taste bad. There's no real fishy flavor or taste to them. They're really a pure oil, and that's how you can tell another pure oil is if you break it open and taste it, it actually doesn't taste real fishy. It actually, or smell real fishy. When you smell fishy smells in fish that you're buying at the market, typically you don't buy it. And that's because the fish is rancid. You're smelling the fatty acids that are oxidized. But children, absolutely, they can do the same thing. They can take it. And you can measure the omega-3 index on children as well, which I highly recommend. I think it's extremely important for the kids today.
Yes, that's true. We have another question about contraindication or side effects when taking lutein supplements. So
lutein is considered GRAS. It's generally recognized as safe. And so meaning that they have not found any toxicity to it. It doesn't go through the cytochrome P450 pathways, so it doesn't inhibit any other reactions that might be taking place with a medication or something. So it's safe there. It's a natural constituent in our diet. And today, the average person in the United States is getting less than 1.5 milligrams per day. We need on order of, boy, I would say, anywhere from 20 to 100 milligrams, depending upon how much you need to absorb of lutein in your diet. And also the way we farm the food today, lutein concentrations now found in foods are much less than they were back in the 40s and 50s when we weren't using all these synthetic pesticides. And so we're seeing a slow and steady decline in our intake in lutein, and it's manifesting as increased levels of age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness. I can't hear you.
What about the combination between B vitamins and DHA? Because they're water soluble and fat soluble. Is there that, I don't know, maybe this person is asking about if you can take it together or you have to divide it?
No, you could take them together. You can definitely take them together. There won't be any. So the B vitamins, the B complexes, support enzymes that help the incorporation, the desaturase enzymes and the elongase enzymes associated with incorporation into the fatty acid membrane of the cell. So that's what the B vitamins do. They help to support the enzymatic reactions so that the fatty acid can get absorbed and put into the cell.
Perfect. And what do you think about supplementation with sulbutiamine? I don't know how to say that in English. So it's sulbutiamine. Okay, let me check what's the name in English. Yes, sulbutiamine.
Yeah, that's a form of thiamine, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that. I know that some people really need it. I've also seen that if you give higher levels of thiamine, you can kind of not need that, but it just depends. It's not that readily available. We can't get it a lot. I could get it, but it's going to be expensive and you have to handle it in a certain way. So we've reverted back to amphetamine and thiamine hydrochloride.
So there is another question about breast implant syndrome and its involvement in the brain. Do you know something about this?
The question is breast implants and
syndrome and the correlation with the brain.
Well, if we've got a foreign object and we're reacting to it, if we've got a foreign object in our body, whether it's an infection, a toxic chemical, a implant of some sort, whether it's from a hip implant that's titanium that we're reacting to, or it's a dental implant that we're reacting to, or it's a breast implant, your body's going to form an immune response if it's reacting to that. And that immune response then can go systemically and create this chronic low-grade inflammatory response, which incites and turns on those microglial cells in the brain. And there's a lot of research now supporting the fact that low obesity increases the level of C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein, even at the level of 3, will have a significant impact on brain morphology, shape of the brain. It will start to shrink the brain, but it will also start to change the chemistry of the brain based on that study that we saw with Andrew Miller out of Emory. He's found that you start to see a change in the neurochemistry in the brain and the neurotransmitters in the brain.
Okay.
So if you're reacting to the breast implant, there's a possibility that your brain could get impacted.
Yes, of course. And so, Michael, it's wonderful. I really love your products. I only have a question because I use a lot the Brain Omega with kids, but sometimes I know that it's very small, but sometimes it's very hard to them to swallow the capsule. So I always tell the parents that you can put it in the smoothie, like in the mixer. Yes, it's okay? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, because I say that the gelatin in there is going to swallow and there's no problem.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I also love the B balance because to me it's wonderful for all the methylations problems. And as we know, there is this SNP with AMTHFR is very common. So the quantity of methylfolate is a good quantity that we never find sometimes this quantity in other supplements with vitamin B. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes,
Good.
yes. Okay. So thank you. And I think we don't have more questions. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Muchas
you.
gracias. Okay. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. Have a great day. Bye.
Yes, you too. Bye.